definitely super excited to get into this today. And yeah, thanks again.
It's my pleasure.
All
Happy
right.
to happy to participate.
Thank you. So I guess to kind of start things off, before we kind of dive into Zelensky and his, fascinating career in humor, I'd love to just start with you and how you were first drawn to this intersection between politics and humor and kind of really exploring this concept.
Sure. Well, let's see. I started listening to Zelensky's performances on the stage back in the 1990s when I was first a student um, traveling and living in the former Soviet Union and Russia and Ukraine and trying to learn the language and really get to know the culture. And one of the ways I did that was to watch humor shows because I figured if I could understand the jokes, then I would know that I really understood something about the place.
Right.
So,
Yes, I guess for people who may not be familiar, I guess, with Zelensky's kind of like pre-political life, can you maybe give, I guess, some context as to, what
sure.
exactly he did in comedy? I know, like, when I was doing a little research, I read about how he founded a, media company called Quartel 95. So I guess, yeah, maybe talk a little bit about that. And
Sure. So the media company is named after the neighborhood where he grew up in a Ukrainian kind of industrial hardscrabble city, where he did comedy with his friends, and he participated in comedy competitions
right.
in mm, in the 19 throughout the 1990s, which means that both Russians and Ukrainians have actually known Zelensky longer than they've known Putin, right?
Oh,
Because
wow.
they grew up like watching and listening to him doing jokes on television. But his comedy really always had a kind of, I wouldn't say that it was necessarily political as such, but it always was about trying to bring people together by having them laugh at their kind of the challenges that they faced in life.
Right.
And that was part of his kind of trademark. And so his group, Quartal 95, which then became a media company and then went on to be blockbuster shows, sort of along the lines of Saturday Night Live, where for a substantial portion of the population, everybody watched the show um, and knew the jokes and so on and so forth. So, that was sort of the main way that people knew Zelensky in both Ukraine and in Russia, because the show topped the charts in both countries up to the Russia's full scale invasion of Ukraine.
Right.
So, although Americans probably read about Zelensky and his sitcom "Servant of the People," that's not the first or main way that Ukrainians knew him for
Right.
decades before.
Right. So when he first kind of entered that political field, was it just a total shock when people who had formerly known this, guy in comedy, had seen him performing when he first kind of, ran for president?
Well, in some ways, there were sort of two particular aspects of that his entrance into political life, which probably were unique in history. Right, the first one was that he entered politics at an age where internet memes and people's engagement, right, through smartphones was really taking off, and that's how he campaigned, right? So, I mean, he didn't do traditional um, political campaign meet and greets and so forth. He campaigned over people's telephones, and that really brought in a whole younger demographic um, and people who otherwise really didn't think of themselves as interested in politics, but they engaged with him that way. And the other really important piece of this is that there was some foreshadowing of his presidential campaign, because in the sitcom Servant of the People, he played a teacher, an ordinary Ukrainian who was captured in an internet meme that went viral when one of his students in the sitcom captured the teacher, played by Zelensky, swearing about the corruption of politicians and staged electoral
Right.
performances. And so, and then the show goes on to tell the story of how this character is then elected president in a surprise move. So it's sort of life imitating life, imitating art, imitating life in his presidential campaign.
Yeah. You kind of touched on this before, but it seems like there's this notion of how when Zelensky first entered politics, like due to his background in comedy, he was already sort of this, known quantity, and people already seemed to have seen him on screen. They've already been able to relate to him in a way. So I guess my question is, how do you think his background in comedy sort of almost helped to forge this trust with the public in a way? And whether it's watching him perform jokes, or was that in a way sort of born out of the comedy that he had already performed?
Absolutely. And I think it's important to note that it's the type of comedy he was performing, right? So the jokes that he and his group told were kind of all about bringing people together, as I said before, by laughing at problems that they all faced. And this is a real challenge in a country like Ukraine, which in some ways is a lot like a country like the United States, right? It has a revolutionary as opposed to an imperial tradition at its origin. People are really different from one region of the country to the other. And then also kind of a difficult and somewhat bloody, well, a difficult and bloody history in which different people in the society played different roles in conflict over the years. And so Zelensky's and his troops' comedy really was about validating people's local identities in different parts of Ukraine, people who were not predisposed to see each other as compatriots or people who had anything in common. By telling jokes about the challenges that they faced, his troop really managed to create a sense of national unity and national identity that was organized not around nationalism, but around a kind of patriotism where people acknowledged that their country had some problems, but that they all were part of a group that could laugh together at their problems, as opposed to, right, laughing at each other.
Yeah. Obviously, he was this big performer. What do you think kind of carried over in terms of certain instincts, whether it's timing, being able to speak in front of people, being able to connect with people? Like, did some of those, I guess, natural instincts sort of carry over to his career in politics? And maybe can you talk about that?
Absolutely. And although there is absolutely nothing funny about Russia's war, that an ongoing, bombardment and occupation of Ukrainian cities, Zelensky still tells jokes and still
Right.
tells jokes about the contrast between Ukrainians and his own leadership, which really emphasizes getting out there, engaging with people. He goes to the front lines as well as going to European capitals. And he contrasts this with with a bunker mentality and makes reference to the Russian leader in doing so, and sort of makes jokes about that. And so really, I think he has continued to, his presidential leadership during the full-scale invasion has benefited enormously, of course, from his sense of timing, comedic timing, from his ability to read a room, to really sincerely and authentically engage with other people and to recognize their experiences and try to get them to recognize the experiences of his countrymen. And that, of course, without those qualities, it's really hard to imagine that that Ukraine even would have survived as a sovereign state amidst Russia's ongoing invasion.
Yeah. One of the striking things that I've kind of seen you written is this quote here. I'm going to read it. You said that for Zelensky and his troop, comedy is an expression of freedom, a way of asserting limitless possibilities, and a tool for working through disagreements with others towards a common goal. So I think, yeah, that quote kind of really encapsulates what you were talking about in a way of how, even in these kind of times of crisis, like his ability to sort of connect with people and people to, when they see him, I guess, to kind of see a familiar face in a way. Can you talk about what you mean, I guess, by that idea?
Sure. I think it's important here to contrast the idea of freedom, which in Ukrainian society, and this is something that the historian Tim Snyder has written about recently as well. In the context of Ukrainian society, the meaning of freedom is organized around the idea of being able to live possibilities, being able to work together toward common goals, being able to resolve problems. It's not freedom as limitless license, right? It's not this idea of freedom is, doing anything you want and saying anything you want to anyone. It's anchored in a sense of sociality and respect for other people. And that really is, I think, the foundation of the type of humor that carried over between Zelensky's career on the stage and then his career as a wartime leader.
More broadly, I guess, how do you think humor in general in times of crisis, like what's going on right now in the region, or whether it be another sort of tragedy, how do you think humor more generally kind of allows people to endure and to kind of, I guess, during something so traumatic to find something to laugh about or to relate to one another?
Sure. I mean, in some ways, Zelensky's humor is a soldier's humor,
Yeah.
right? It's a way of using laughter to get through um, to maintain courage,
Right.
right? To face down fear in the amidst objectively really scary situations. Um, I mean, again, the Ukrainians provide some interesting historical experience here too, because I mean, if you don't mind, get to get back to Zelensky for a moment. He's working out of a national tradition in which, right, everywhere in Ukraine, school children memorize a poem written by a 19th century poet, Lesya Ukrainka, that has a Latin title, Contra Spem Spero, I Will Hope Against Hope. And it's all about laughing in the face of challenges. And she says, I'm going to laugh through tears. I'm going to sing songs through hardship. In some ways, it has a lot in common with American gospel traditions, right? There's one line from the poem that says, I'll lift up a heavy stone and carrying this fearful weight, I'll sing a joyful song, right? And so this is sort of the idea behind a lot of what Zelensky's humor and, laughter more broadly can represent. It's a way of taking a really difficult situation or challenges that life brings,
Yeah.
and finding not always joy, but certainly defiance, right, of them.
Yeah, it sounds like authenticity, I think, is kind of a good word to describe it. And when I was doing some more research on you, like I found that you always talked about how in past regimes in Ukraine, a lot of the regimes kind of relied on these. I know the word that you use, kind of political theater, and how there's a lot of, I guess, stage rallies or fake enthusiasm, kind of like manipulation. So I guess how do you think Zelensky's kind of comedic authenticity help break that mold of that political theater? I guess you can call.
Yeah, I think it provided a breath of fresh air, right? The context here, going back to when he was elected as president, was that for decades, Ukrainians had experienced a playbook that was imported from Russia of winning elections by doing a few things. I think many Americans are now already familiar with what this playbook looks like. But in addition to things like controlling the media and so on and so forth, the key elements were politicizing bureaucracies and then using bureaucracies to put pressure, economic pressure on people so that they had to go and vote for incumbent politicians. And so this ended up being kind of this countrywide theatrical production, right? Elections were a mise en scène. And people experienced that as politicians laughing at them, right? The joke was on the politicians, the joke was on the population when politicians organized theatrical representations of democracy. When Zelensky came along, his authenticity and his ability to connect with people and also his anti-corruption message really resonated, and he took politics off the stage, right, and back into the streets. And then the joke was on incumbent politicians, not on the population.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So you kind of got into this idea earlier about how humor can kind of forge this, I guess, like national unity in a way. And one quote that I found that you also wrote in a political article, you said, quote, shared understanding of humor draws the boundaries of the nation. I think that's a really profound idea. So can you maybe unpack that for us? And I guess, like, what does it mean for a country's identity when its citizens are kind of laughing at the same things, you know?
Sure. I mean, this is all about who gets the joke,
Yeah.
right? And being part of the community that gets the joke uh, creates a sense of complicity and unity. And when that unity and complicity is connected to real world experience and authentic expression of democratic values, that's a very powerful force. I would add to that, that authenticity is incredibly important, almost as an index of democratic politics and democracy. If we think about some leaders that political scientists like to describe as illiberals or authoritarians, often they're following their followers,
Right.
right? They're kind of hiding behind jokes to disguise, or maybe not to disguise, but just to make it hard to know where they stand, really, right? Like they might make a joke that is politically incorrect, and then they'll say, oh, well, that was just a joke. Like,
Yeah.
why are you upset, right? But Zelensky and that brand of humor is the opposite of that. You know, people in Ukraine don't always like where Zelensky stands, but they know where he stands,
Right.
right? And so this is a kind of democratic agonism, right? Where disagreement is part of the game. We all may get the same jokes. We're part of the same community. Doesn't mean we have to all agree all the time, but it's not the same thing as antagonism, where we're turning humor on each other and we're using derision and sort of dehumanizing other people in order to laugh together, right? Which is that's a bully's comedy, right? It's a coward's comedy. What I'm talking about here is really kind of the opposite of that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I want to get into, I guess, one specific skit that I think is kind of famous with Zelensky, and I've seen you, you actually write about it. It's called the Despacito, like that. It's like a musical parody, and I guess on the surface, it's kind of, just a bunch of people making fun of the different ways Ukrainians say thank you. But you've argued that it's actually more part of that idea of, nation building. Is actually very uniting. So I guess, can you sort of talk about, first of all, I guess, what that sort of musical parody was and
Sure,
why you think it was so impactful?
sure. So it was a, a song parody, sung to the tune of Despacito.
Yeah.
Okay, but which they translated as Despacito, which in Ukrainian culture is one locality's way of saying, well, thank you.
Right.
And so the lyrics of the song refer to the different phrases people in different Ukrainian cities use to say thank you. Um, and so the whole point of the song parody was to kind of lift up and validate this different Ukrainians' regional and local identities. And to say also, maybe we don't always use the same words, but we all know what we mean when we say thank you to each other.
Right.
And so again, it was part of this way of creating national unity by valorizing the local, creating national unity by saying to people in different cities, hey, we see you, right? Like we're not all the same here, but we're all part of this one place and country we call Ukraine.
Right. You also think his kind of unique ability to, use humor in such a hard time right now. Do you think that has sort of also helped him internationally to be more effective, whether it's, building alliances or building trust with, different leaders in a way? Like, is that sort of translated to that as well, you think?
Absolutely. I mean, if you watch a video of Zelensky meeting with European leaders or leaders anywhere, I mean, there's very frequently some joking around that happens at the beginning. I think recently there was one during a visit to Germany, right, where there was a delay with the translation apparently, and there was joking about German technology, right?
Right.
And so Zelensky very often kind of jokes around in ways that create a sense of being on the same side and a sense of friendship as well. Um, there's also I'd like to bring up another example, if I may,
Sure, yeah.
um, because sometimes that complicity is created. Sometimes Zelensky creates that complicity by using a comedic form that allows the viewer, the audience, to use their own imagination. So one of the memes that got a lot of traction internationally, as well as in Ukraine, was an extract from a videoed interview with Zelensky, where the interviewer asks him, "What's your favorite joke about Putin?" And what follows is not a joke. Zelensky looks at the interviewer and he kind of smiles and laughs to himself. And then he says, "Oh, I don't know if this is the place." Um, and so the audience sees that he's thinking a joke,
Right.
but he doesn't say what it is, which allows the audience to imagine perhaps Ukrainians might have their own jokes in mind. But it creates this space where everybody kind of gets the joke, but for an international audience, it was it wasn't a specific joke that maybe the international audience might not have got, but it was a way of inviting the audience into laughter.
Right. Yeah. It's super rare, I think, to be a leader of your nation under war. Like the ones that come to mind are someone like, Winston Churchill
Yeah.
or someone like Lincoln. And they're also two figures who I feel like are very synonymous for also having this sort of great ability to also wield humors. I guess when you sort of look at Zelensky and, figures like that, can you sort of compare him at all to figures like that in a way? Or do you see any sort of similarities and differences between them?
Well, I think that Zelensky is clearly a unique and powerful statesman,
Yeah.
and and who has managed to bring and use humor and democratic forms um, of laughter to lead. So I don't know. That's one I'd have to think about a little bit. But it's clear that humor has been a key element of humor has been a key element of Zelensky's statesmanship.
Right. Yeah. When he was first running, I guess, for politics, on the flip side, I guess, was there also a lot of drawback that he faced, from whether it's his political opponents or people in Ukraine that sort of saw him as, not so serious person, or that he was going to be like a comedian in chief, or did he face a lot of that criticism as well?
Sure, he faced some criticism. He won in a landslide, but there was still a quarter of the population that was not supportive. But I think it also needs to be said that Ukrainians' self-identity is really anchored in the idea of holding politicians accountable,
Right.
right? So not all his policies or decisions are popular, and when they're not popular, Ukrainians let him know and let their leaders know. Very recently, as you may know, people took to the streets. I mean, there are drones and missiles overhead, and people still, protested
Yeah.
when they didn't like a decision of the government. They're holding their government to account because they're fighting this war for values, right? Yeah, I think it's important to understand that the complicity that Zelensky's exceptional leadership has both drawn upon and produced, and the national unity and the natural rally around the flag, right, that happens during a time of war, albeit amidst ongoing challenges. It's not, unanimous, nor should it be. It's a democratic society, right? It's normal for some people to disagree. And it's a measure of leaders when they're willing to, roll with that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's also that, I'm not sure how many months ago this was, but there's also that, very famous moment when, Trump and Zelensky in the White House had that, very, I guess, fiery interaction. So I'm just curious, I guess, sort of what you thought about that, and I guess how people sort of perceived Zelensky in that moment.
Oh, yeah. I don't think that the criticisms that emerged out of that interaction had to do with Zelensky's behavior. I In some ways, Zelensky, uh, domestically, that is to say, in Ukraine, came out, I believe, stronger because he showed that he would stand up. But I think there was also a sentiment widely shared in Ukraine that I think was also shared in the United States, which is, um, I mean, who treats a guest that way?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I guess, I just have 2 more questions left. I guess one of the sort of close out, like, obviously, it's very rare to have a leader, that was a former comedian. So I guess, what do you think are some of the lessons, I think, from Zelensky's story that you think can be, used to, young young politicians or leaders out there? I guess, what can other sort of democratic leaders take from his story, I guess, his, background, and not just in campaigning, but in also in, being able to govern?
Sure. I think given that, I'm going to give you a longer answer and you can take what you'd like of it. Russia's waging in the context of Ukraine, Russia's waging a kinetic war, but it's also waging a cyber war against other countries, ours included, or at least that's how they announce it. And so, in the context of various actors who would like to polarize democratic societies, the ability to cultivate societal unity is incredibly important, right? It's one of the challenges of our age. Arguably, in a period in which we're likely to see increasing use of deep fakes, of a crisis around knowledge connected with AI, where people are going to be even less sure than usual about what's true and what's not true. Societal polarization is really likely to be sort of the key challenge. So what can we learn from Zelensky about how to face the challenge of societal polarization? Zelensky's comedy focused people's attention on the challenges that they faced, rather than focusing people's attention on some kind of imagined enemy, right, within society. His comedy and the comedy of his fellow comedians sought to foster a sense of societal unity by showing people from parts of society who didn't necessarily feel included in the national community that they were seen, right? And by doing so, by fostering a patriotism that was anchored in love of country, ability to laugh at our mistakes, ability to strive together toward a common goal, they created a space for people who didn't see themselves as nationalists to see themselves as patriots, right? And so that kind of humor that doesn't dehumanize or degrade other people, but really creates a sense of solidarity by saying, look, we're all people here.
Yeah.
And even people who hate us are also people. We shouldn't be afraid of them.
Right. Like
Um,
humanizing, yeah.
yeah, it's broadly humanizing. I mean, his troupe, who Kvartal 95 and other Ukrainian comedy groups still continue to, they do shows and people go there to laugh. They need that. They need that break. And even when they joke about, Russian soldiers, they're not portraying monsters. They're portraying human beings who, they might be, they might have certain human failures, right? But they're, the understanding here is that the people who are attacking us, this is for Ukrainians, right? They're only people, and we should not be afraid of them. And that's a lesson also that I think young leaders today can learn from, right? That we are all only people. We all have failures. We all have weaknesses. But if we can learn together to laugh at the challenges if we can learn together to laugh at the challenges we face as we work together to solve problems, then that's what's going to create a sense of unity and momentum and joy.
Yeah, right. Laugh to learn is a good
Yeah.
good, motto. So I guess the last question I had is, I would love to ask this to my guest, but I guess when you're looking at Zelensky's career as a whole, what do you think is, I guess, your I guess, favorite example or favorite joke that he's ever made, whether it's, pre him becoming president or post? I guess, like, what's kind of that, one joke or skit that you just think is kind of the best, in your opinion?
Tough question. I think I'm going to mimic Zelensky's joke about Putin here. I just laughed to myself.
Alright. Good answer, that's a good answer.